Hey everyone, welcome back to In Her Wallet podcast. I'm Sophia, your host, a Vancouver based financial educator and founder of In Her Wallet. I am so excited for today's episode because we're talking about jewelry and engagement rings in particular. Now, picture this: you got engaged and suddenly your ring is gone. Maybe you lost it, maybe it got stolen, maybe the diamond fell out. Panic sets in, and then comes this thought, wait, I should have insured it. The truth is, so many couples overlook or do not prioritize ring insurance, even though they spent thousands of dollars on these pieces. That's why today I'm sitting down with Dustin Lemick, a third generation jeweler and founder of BriteCo, a leading jewelry insurance provider. With over a decade of experience, Dustin has seen it all: ring losses, unexpected mishaps, and those I wish I had insured moments. In this episode, we chat about things like why many couples don't prioritize reinsurance, how much a good insurance actually costs, what it covers, and Dustin shares some pretty cool stories about ring loss or theft, and some of them with a happy ending. So if you've ever wondered whether you need engagement ring insurance or any jewelry insurance, how to get started, and what a good policy should look like, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Dustin, welcome to In Her Wallet podcast. I'm so excited to be talking with you today. We have an exciting conversation ahead of us for anyone who recently got engaged or is hoping to soon. So thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Can you share a few words about yourself and what you do just so we can lay the ground for our conversation ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the founder and CEO of BriteCo. BriteCo is a modern jewelry insurance company. My background is actually somewhat unusual. I come from the jewelry space. My family is a third generation jeweler in Chicago. So I sort of grew up in the jewelry industry. And while I was working in the industry, I noticed that there were a lot of issues with insurance for jewelry insurance for jewelers and for our customers. And so I just imagined that there had to be a better way to do it. And so back in 2018, I left the jewelry industry and started BriteCo, our jewelry insurance company.
Let's start with a scenario. Imagine you just got engaged, you got your girl a beautiful ring, but unfortunate series of events happens and she loses it, or even worse, maybe the diamond falls out. And I'm constantly checking my ring. I'm always so scared that it's gonna happen. I actually got a habit of always checking it like that since I got it. But the first reaction is probably shock. Then you're trying to find it, go into places where you've been, and finally, if you can't find it, you're like, what do I do now? I should have insured it. In reality, from your experience working in this industry, how many couples actually do not protect their rings or do not insure it? Do we have a stat on that or any facts about it?
Yeah, we do. I mean, first, there is a real lack of awareness or education, I would say, as well, in terms of jewelry insurance. Folks are a lot of times might consider themselves insured or think they're insured through their homeowners policy. Over 40% of people are underinsured or not insured at all, which is a huge, huge number. And so part of my job and part of what we try to do at BriteCo is just bring some education to the table and really help folks understand what the options are, and also, what kind of coverage is offered and what the pricing is, because it's actually really affordable. But really, it's over 40% of people are underinsured or not insured at all.
I mean, for a lot of people, an engagement ring would be one of the significant purchases they'll make in their lifetime. Yet protection isn't always, top of mind. Why do you think that happens?
It's kind of crazy to me, actually, because we've done a lot of research and studies and things like that on the market, and it's usually, for if you use an engagement ring as an example, for young folks, it's a top 3 purchase. So it's up there with like auto and home, and then engagement ring. A lot of times it's actually the biggest purchase somebody's made in their life.
Yeah.
And to me, that should definitely be protected. And there's other things as well, which is like, it's a very sentimental purchase. It's very meaningful. It's a bit of a blind purchase as well. Like some folks, most people don't know about diamonds and they go through this education process to buy them and then they spend a lot of money. And so, to me, that screams that there should be some protection there.
Yeah, and it's a good thing if they get any sort of education before they buy it, because for a majority of us, we never actually come across a conversation about diamonds until it comes to the point where, you're proposing to your girl or she's choosing a ring for herself. So you're totally right there. What are some of the misconceptions do you think that exist in this space about insurance for engagement rings?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your previous point too, we have a big network of jewelers at BriteCo, and we are constantly working with our partners to help educate and to help when they're in the engagement ring purchasing process to say, look, don't forget to mention jewelry insurance. And like we provide a lot of information to our jeweler partners. But going back to your question about misconceptions, one of the biggest misconceptions, and this gets people in trouble, and they usually don't figure it out to like post facto till after the situation happens, is that a lot of people think that they're adequately covered with their homeowners insurance policy, which is a big problem because
Which is my case. I have my ring insurance under homeowners insurance.
so this, it could be okay, but most of the time it's not, and for these reasons. So a lot of times there's these caps on your homeowners insurance policy. So a lot of times it's capped, like you're only covered up to like $1,500 or $2,000, and usually that's not adequate enough.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, there's high deductibles, things like that, and then in the end too, you have to look at like, well, what kind of coverage are you actually getting? A big conversation happening right now is that homeowners, and I don't know if you know this or the listeners know this, but homeowners prices have gone crazy. So in states
Yeah.
like California and Florida, you're seeing homeowners rates like double sometimes. It's really crazy. So the other thing I'll mention about adding it to your homeowner's policy is if you do have a loss on a piece of jewelry, you are now claiming that against your homeowner's policy. And that means, okay, you're going to get dinged by your homeowner's policy. Your homeowner's policy is going to go up even more.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of reasons why I could say it's not really the best thing to do is to add it to your homeowner's policy.
So I'm really curious to kind of dig deeper into that conversation about having an insurance that's specifically for your engagement ring versus insuring your jewelry under homeowners insurance. But first, I want to take a step back and ask you, if we have people who are listening to this episode right now and they've actually never heard of a thing such as insurance for your engagement ring, how would you describe what is an engagement ring insurance?
That's a very good question, and it's very common. We live in a world where there's lots of like tailor-made specialty products for basically everything. Our product is a tailor-made jewelry insurance policy only for jewelry and watches. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the coverage is crafted specifically for jewelry. There's no coverage gaps. On a claim, there's expertise there in terms of going through a replacement. I mean, because ultimately you're buying insurance in the case that something happens and you have to put a claim in. So you really want to make sure that who you're working with, who you're insured with, knows what they're doing when it comes time, the most important time of a claim. A general homeowners insurance company, to be honest with you, they know very little about insurance, jewelry insurance, I should say. They know very little
Mm-hmm.
about jewelry insurance.
I'm sure they'll know a lot about floods and fires
Yes.
happening in your place,
Yes.
but not a lot of things that can happen to your engagement ring.
Exactly right. It's important to look and say, okay, do I have the right product for what I'm trying to do? What I was mentioning before about not having your homeowners rates go wild. That's the other thing too, is like, we don't report a claim against your homeowner's policy. We don't do that. And another misconception I should mention, you asked about that before, is price. Like a lot of people think very expensive. It's actually not expensive at all. So at BriteCo, I could talk about how our pricing works. It's a 0.5% to 1.5% of the total value. I mean, that means, using an example, just like a round number example, a $10,000 ring would be, call it $50 to $125 annually. Like, that's pretty reasonable.
My husband has a watch and he's had it for, I want to say 10 years, and he's always had it insured until a couple years ago. He, I think, made the insurance cover less or something like that. And he's like, the reason I did it is because all the money I've spent on the insurance for the past decade to insure this watch, I could have bought a new one already. What would you say to someone like that?
It's a very legitimate question and legitimate point. I think it depends on how much you're paying on an annual basis, right? Like, if the value is there, so let's just use the example I just gave. And not, the pricing can be all across the board, right? So like, there's some companies out there that charge quite a bit, but if it's call it 1% on average, although it's potentially going to be less than that. How many years at 1% is it going to take you to pay back that whole amount, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
100 years. So, if you do the math, I think it's quite valuable.
But also the peace of mind that comes with it.
Yes.
I'm constantly worried that something's going to happen to my ring. And you're always like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. In the past year alone, I've had two girls in my close circle of friends who got engaged and something happened to their ring. One was moving and the prong came off. The other one just saw the diamond came out as she was sleeping. Thank God it happened at night when she was in bed and she was able to find that diamond ring. Imagine if that happened when she was out and about. So I know that these things are common. And I think, if anything, getting your piece of jewelry insured, a piece of jewelry that's very important to you and has meaning to it, provides that peace of mind. And I'm willing to pay for that peace of mind.
It's a really good point. Peace of mind is critical. And we've seen lots and lots of examples of losing the items on honeymoons or on boats, or just, there's a lot of different reasons that somebody could lose it. And I think the peace of mind is a good point. And the other thing too is, for a lot of folks, especially people just starting out with their life and getting married, you got to ask yourself, how painful would it be to come out of pocket to replace the item? If you're saying that would be really, really painful, or some people say, like, I don't even know if it's viable that I can, go back and
I cannot do another one purchase like that. Yeah.
There's a lot of folks out there that are like, yeah, this would be really painful. And those are the people that I would say, look, you definitely want to consider insurance if it's going to be that painful. Now, some folks might be like, hey, not a big deal. I'll just buy another one. No big deal. Now, if you're in that camp, then maybe you shouldn't have it. Maybe you should just self-insure.
Dustin, what kind of things are covered under engagement ring jewelry policy? Is it if I lose it? Is it if the diamond comes out? Can we just kind of list few scenarios that might happen that are covered?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Now, of course, it depends on your policy, your specific policy. So like, we've talked a little bit about homeowners. Homeowners would not cover some of the things that we would cover. So I'll give you an example of what we offer. And I believe we have the broadest, most comprehensive coverage, or one of the in the market. Loss, theft, damage, mysterious disappearance, which is the big one. Yes, I will get into what that. So everybody asks, and people have never heard of it, but it's one that homeowners does not cover. We cover it, and it's the most common cause of loss. What it is it's kind of like what it sounds. I had my ring on my finger 2 days ago, and yesterday I noticed that it wasn't on my finger, and I don't know what happened. I know that there was no theft. It wasn't stolen to my knowledge, and it's not damaged because I don't have it. It's just gone. It would be a mysterious disappearance. And so it's very important coverage, because that is in the vast majority of the time. We see other things too. We see damage, somebody hitting it on something, or unfortunately we do see theft somewhat regularly, but mysterious disappearance, that's a big one.
What's the difference between, first of all, when you were describing that scenario, I have like shivers all over my body because I don't want to picture myself going through that ever. But what's the difference between loss and mysterious disappearance? Because it sounds very similar.
It is similar, but mysterious disappearance is just more broad. So you don't have to prove, like for mysterious disappearance, you don't have to prove that you actually like kind of lost it, or like I know I lost it I went to an event and I lost it there and whatever. It's just kind of more general and more broad, where loss is kind of can be more narrow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So you mentioned the word prove, and I think for a lot of people, the feeling they get when they think about insurance is I will buy the coverage, but 100% the insurance company will do something so that, you know, I'm unable to get the coverage because I have to go to a very large extent of proving that. Is that true in the jewelry insurance space? And how can someone set themselves up for success to make sure they do get the coverage if something happens?
Very good question. It's not true. Although the caveat is there is some situations where your insurance company, or I can speak for us, where we would ask you for some more information. But it's all very reasonable stuff. And this is why it's really important, and why it's a really good question to do your homework on what company you're working with. Because I cannot speak for all companies. And I do agree with you. That is, people are worried about that, and they're worried about the gotchas and all that kind of stuff, which is ridiculous. And I think that there's no room for that kind of stuff in our industry. But unfortunately, some companies do that. We do not. So I'll give you an example of how it works, kind of on a claim. So you would go on our website, you'd fill out a short claims form, and you just basically put a description in what happened. Generally, you would get a follow up from a claims adjuster within 12 hours, usually within the same day. And they would sort of walk you through the process. They would ask questions and just kind of try to understand what happened. And then they would sort of start processing through the claim for you. The one caveat is if there was like a burglary or theft. In those situations, we would ask for, hey, is there a police report? Hey, is there any information you can give us around the circumstances? Things like that are very, very basic kind of things, like not super intrusive. But that's sort of where it stops here for us. Now, and I think one of the things is there's other lines of business where it's much heavier and there's much more that needs to be proven out. So it kind of just, I think it kind of depends on the situation a little bit. But by and large, we don't try to make hurdles. We try to service our customers so they can have a good claims experience and be made whole and essentially utilize the insurance.
Dustin, I understand that there are different types of insurances, different packages probably, but if something bad happens to my ring, what can I expect to receive in return if I do insure it? Do I get the full value of the ring? Do I get a percentage? How does that what's the outcome on the other side?
So the majority of policies available are called replacement policies. And so what that is the insurance company will replace the item for you with the same type, same quality. Some insurance companies like us, like we're very knowledgeable in the jewelry space. If you said, hey, I actually had a cushion, and if I'm going to replace it, I spoke with my significant other and we decided like maybe I want it around. Like we would work with our customers and our clients, our policyholders on things like that. We would essentially establish a value and say, look, this is the replacement value. If you wanted to do something different or you wanted to make a change, we would work with you. We work directly with your jeweler too, by the way.
That was going to be my question. Because, for example, I have a jeweler that I work with. Can I involve them in the process, or would you have the final say, or who is the jeweler or the company that's going to produce the ring going to be in that process?
Yeah, 100%. Like we would work directly with your jeweler of choice, but not all insurance companies are like that, especially the homeowners carriers. They have these like preferred networks. I hated this when I was in the jewelry industry. The big carriers have these preferred networks. And so they basically force you into one of their preferred networks. It's a lot of times very suboptimal. When you say like your situation, you're like, hey, I have a jeweler that I work with. We bought our ring from them, love them. A lot of times that's a personal relationship to some degree. And, it kind of sucks to say, hey, no, you can't work with them. So not only do
Hmm.
we have a huge network across the country in terms of we work with thousands and thousands of jewelers that we work with. We would work with any reputable jeweler that you would prefer.
That's good. That definitely gives another layer of kind of peace of mind and just handling the process more smoothly. Dustin, can you share some stories, maybe with your clients or the people that you worked with, where they perhaps had a ring that they lost and they didn't have an insurance? And maybe we can share one where it's a positive outcome, where they had an insurance and everything was good.
Yeah, we have a lot of stories. I think the stories where I feel like really connected with is we see a lot of losses from folks on their honeymoon. The ring, a lot of times, like the ring might not fit exactly right. Um,
Because
you
you
know,
just got it. Yeah.
they just got it or they're not used to wearing it because it's new and
Hmm.
they're just not in that rhythm. A lot of times, if they're going to warm weather places, there's a lot of water activities where folks lose rings in pools, in
Right.
the ocean. And so I really pride ourselves when those situations, those are really hard, very difficult for somebody when they're like, I'm on my honeymoon, I just got the ring, and like they're just distraught. That's when we can
Aw.
come in and be, we try to be superheroes and say, don't worry about it, we got you, we'll make this all right. And you try to just give that peace of mind. And so there's a lot of stories like that where we've come in and really been able to help and provide the peace of mind and let folks kind of enjoy their honeymoon, knowing the rest of their honeymoon, knowing this is not an ideal situation, but it will be taken care of. Uh,
Yes.
a funny one that I use a lot is we it was a couple this, and it was not a super small ring. It was like, I think it was like 50 or $60,000 ring. Um,
Significant.
the dog ate it. Like literally, it's like the dog ate my homework thing, but the dog ate the ring. And these sweet couple, they were distraught, and it was very sentimental to them. And they recovered the ring, and so we now
Yeah, I
we
was like, I hope the thing came out on the other end.
so they you can imagine like what they were going through for, I think it was like a day or two later, what they were just monitoring their dog 24/7. And we did offer, and we went through and helped them get it refinished and get it cleaned and all that. And we got them connected to one of our jeweler partners in the local area. And so we were able to still take care of what they needed to take care of, but they found the ring, and that was a crazy one. I mean, there's a lot. And then we have the unfortunate ones too, which are like really hard, which are the thefts. Those are really brutal sometimes, where people are pretty shaken up, which is, it sucks. We had a couple in the Palisade fires that just happened recently, where again, those are a totally unforeseen circumstance. A couple of these folks had their house burned to the ground completely. They lost everything, but they had, they were covered. They had jewelry insurance, and their jewelry was covered. So, you know,
Good.
yeah.
Can I ask you, Dustin? I actually have two questions. First one, I want to go back when we were talking about how the things are covered, and you mentioned to me usually it's a replacement. I was going to ask you, what's it if it's an heirloom ring that's been passed down by generations? It's an era where a piece cannot be replaced. What's offered in that case?
So the key component really is establishing the value, which we do up front. So there's that. And then you sort of establish a price and say, hey, understood that your grandmother's brooch, you cannot go buy your grandmother's brooch again. So then we would work with our policyholders and say, okay, this is kind of the value. What would you like to do? And sometimes they'd say, I'm going to buy another brooch that's different, or I'm going to buy a necklace instead in her memory, or things like that. And we would work with our customers along those lines.
So there is quite a bit of flexibility involved. And then the second question I had for you, what are the most common types of theft when it comes to jewelry? Like, how does that usually happen? And how can someone protect themselves from it besides insurance? If you have any tips for our audience like that, I think that'll be super helpful.
I mean, the first two things I would say, and we actually offer discounts on the premium if you have these two things, is get a safe and then get an alarm on your house. Like if you have a central station alarm and a decent safe and you store your jewelry in the safe, like those two things alone will really help. The other things too, Rolexes and really high-end watches are targeted. Like those are targeted items. So just if you're wearing your Rolex, even if it's insured, just be smart about it. Being aware, if like sometimes there'll be situations where someone's walking on the street in New York and somebody tries to rob them. So those would be the three things I would say. Invest in a safe, an alarm, and then just be smart and aware.
I mean, having a safe and alarm at home is great, but I feel like oftentimes, especially in the US, theft happens when you're out and about. My husband and a couple months ago, we were based in Vancouver in Canada, but we went to Seattle. It's a very short drive for us. And we went for dinner and we were walking back to our hotel. And I was like, I don't feel safe here. And he has his Rolex, and like you can see it. And I was, just put your sleeve over. Let's be careful. So I think just recognizing the environment you're in and being a little bit more cautious is probably helpful as well. Dustin, so we've talked extensively about ring insurance. For someone who might be thinking, okay, I want to insure my ring and I've never had it insured before, or for someone like me who has it insured under their home policy but wants to now switch to actual ring insurance, what's the first step one should take?
I mean, the first thing, get a quote. A lot of companies make it really easy to get quotes. We do with us on our website. You can get a quote in 30 seconds. You can buy a policy in literally 2 minutes. So it was another thing that I saw when I was working in the jewelry industry, going back to like my roots, is that some companies made it really difficult to fill out forms and to do all this stuff to get a policy. Like it really shouldn't be brain damage to buy a jewelry insurance policy. And so we've sort of tried to make it as distilled as possible. I would say, like, from a recommendation, just make sure you're comfortable with the coverage, do any research you might feel like you want to do, and then, get quotes. And then, find a company that makes it easy, that's not going to be difficult to get coverage. And a lot of times you can just buy it right online. And that's what I would do. It shouldn't be hard.
What kind of things and factors determine the price and cost of insurance in an engagement ring?
That's another good question. So with insurance, most insurance products, pricing, it's not like buying a pair of shoes. There's different underwriting components that go into pricing an insurance policy. And all the pricing is regulated in the United States, heavily, heavily regulated, state by state as well. So things that will factor into pricing, I already said in terms of like preventative devices, safes, alarms that could provide discounts.
Oh, you mean if I have a safe at home, that would provide the
Yes.
discount to my ring insurance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Same with the alarm. Then there's things like homeownership can factor in, sometimes credit score can factor in.
What about the ring itself? Does the carat size, the type of gemstone, do things like that affect the price?
Obviously, certainly the value will affect price. There's different price bands for how these things are priced. The actual item itself, though, with us, no. Like we don't charge more for a sapphire versus a diamond or something like that. Watches are different. We can put watches in the side. Those are a little bit different for most companies. But yeah, it's things like what you fill out in your application. So another example would be, we ask if in our application, I think there's like 6 or 7 questions we ask. That's it. We'll ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony or a crime? That's what we call a kick out question. Like you wouldn't be eligible for our insurance if you answered, yes, I've been convicted of a felony. So there are pieces to that like that are out there.
Do I need to prepare anything in advance in order for me to go and fill out that application, or everything is pretty straightforward?
So the process for us works like from a step-by-step perspective. You can go to our website, you get a quote in 30 seconds. If that looks good, you fill out a couple questions. It's probably like literally a 2-minute process to get a policy. So within a couple minutes, you can have the policy. Now, after you purchase the policy, we ask for 2 things. And this is where you might need. So we give you 2 weeks after the policy to provide a selfie of the ring. So you literally just take a picture of it with your phone. Fine, easy enough. and then some sort of paperwork, a receipt, an appraisal, something that says what it is.
Like a GIA
A
certificate?
GIA certificate, an IGI certificate, anything you might have that can help information on what you're insuring.
Sounds good. And then in order for me to get that initial quote that you mentioned you get in 30 seconds, what do I need to give you?
So we don't need anything for the initial quote. We also don't need anything for you to be able to actually bind the policy and get coverage right away. And then we give you 2 weeks after that for those last two pieces, the selfie and some sort of paperwork.
But how do you calculate my coverage if you don't know what kind of ring I have?
So the first quote, it's a quote range. So we'll say your price is about, and it's based on certain characteristics, zip codes, a couple other things. And then you say, okay, this sounds good. It's about, $15 to $20 a month or whatever the price is. You're like, okay. And so our aim, what we try to do is we try to give you, okay, here's directionally the price. And if you're interested, then you can continue and fill out more information. Then you give us like your address, do you own or rent? And then if you wanted to add an additional insured, you wanted to add your significant other, you could do that as well. And then you answer like 7 questions, and that's basically it.
If I'm in Canada, but you're in the US, can you insure my ring?
Today, we don't have coverage in Canada, but in the future, we will.
What if I travel to the US often?
So it's established by where you live.
Another thing I wanted to ask you
Sure.
is with the rise of lab-grown diamonds, does insurance work the same way for them or a bit different?
It works actually exactly the same way. And we insure a lot of lab-grown diamonds and lab-grown tennis bracelets and studs and all of that. It works exactly the same way.
Is there kind of a minimum value to a piece of jewelry you would say that it should have in order for me to consider even getting an insurance? I probably wouldn't get an insurance for my earrings that are $150. So what's kind of the minimum start?
Very good question. We get this asked a lot. It can depend on personal preference a little bit. General rule of thumb, around $1,000 or $1,500 is usually what I recommend. Although some people say, you know what, $2,000 is like anything under $2,000, I'll self-insure. But I usually think like if it's $1,000 or $1,500 for the price, it's usually worth it at that point.
Makes sense. Dustin, if there's one piece of advice listeners take away from our conversation today, what should that be?
Yeah, just stay educated on the products that are available to you. There's a lot of really good products in jewelry insurance and other insurance products and just in general. What I like to do, I like to just be educated on these things so I can make good decisions because they can really be valuable and be worthwhile.
I agree with you. Well, this has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. Dustin, for our listeners from the US, how can they find your company and how can they work with you if they're interested?
Yeah, super simple. They can just go directly to our website and we've got a bunch of information on there. We've got more coverage information and education. And then of course, like we talked about, you can get a quote and purchase a policy if you choose to right on our website.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you coming on as a guest.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Thank you for tuning into In Her Wallet. If today's episode inspired you or gave you a new perspective, it would mean so much to me if you followed us on your podcasting platform of choice, shared this episode with your friends, and left a 5-star rating and review. I want this episode to serve as a reminder that you're not alone in your financial journey. This podcast is your guide to financial success, equipping you to live your best life without sacrificing your financial future. It was Sophia with you this Wednesday, and I will see you next week.